Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started. This panel is titled Seeing the Forest Through the Trees, Telling the Story to Stop the Destruction. And we'll let all of our panelists introduce themselves as they present. And I have the honor of going first. So hello, my name is Madeline Cowan. I'm the grassroots organizer with Cascadia Wildlands. Cascadia Wildlands is based in Eugene, and we work throughout the Cascadia bioregion, specifically on Western Oregon moist forests, to do our work to defend and restore Cascadia's bioregion in the forests, in the courts, and in the streets. So today we're going to be talking about public lands in Oregon and Washington and in Idaho in the Pacific Northwest. Most of our focus will be in Oregon, and so I wanted to ground us in the context of indigenous land theft that is really important to have keep in mind when we're talking about public land defense, which is what we are talking about today. So public lands are absolutely very complicated, and we acknowledge and recognize all of the many complex and diverse tribes who have made their homelands in this region since time immemorial. And as many of us are trying to deal with that reality in our work, we think it's important to value those peoples. Again, we are talking about do you like the political cartoon there? Yeah, I like that one too because I think it's a good visual. So we're talking today about public lands, and and public lands have a historical legacy that systematically removed indigenous peoples of this area into the hands of the federal government. I've listed a couple of the laws that basically made this a reality on the landscape today. And it's an absolutely brutal history that I encourage folks to become aware with in all of their work. And as a result resulting from the systemic removal of indigenous peoples into the federal government, there is now a very complex and landscape that we're dealing with here in the Pacific Northwest. The non-federal forests are highlighted in green, and the blue is federal forests. And so you see that there's a lot of important forests in this region, and they're just incredibly diverse. Every single stand of forest that you go into is going to be different from the next, and so that's really important for what we're talking about today, which is mostly around field surveying, which I'm letting my friends really talk about that more. But why are these forests so important? These forests in the Pacific Northwest are absolutely critical for combating the climate crisis. They are some of the best carbon sinks and stores of carbon in the entire world, and are rivaled with those of the Amazon rainforest. So it's really important that we maintain and keep these important old growth and mature forests intact. But these forests in the Pacific Northwest are obviously more important than just their carbon sequestration and storage potential. They offer important habitat for wildlife and for recreation opportunities, for foraging opportunities, and everything in between. I'm sure you all love drinking water. Water is forests are very crucial for providing fresh drinking water for all of our communities. And what is the biggest threat to these very, very important, vital ecosystems is the number one threat is logging. And actually, when we're thinking about climate change and the crisis at hand, the largest emitter of carbon in the state is from the timber industry. And so our work is really focused on any and all forest defense that we can do. And the scale of logging is absolutely massive. This photo is, this is public land. This is after the Archie Creek fire. That happened in the Umpqua watershed, and the federal agencies did post-fire logging, and they absolutely denuded this entire ridge line here, and this is not an uncommon story that we're seeing in forested lands throughout the Pacific Northwest. But wait, I thought that we had the Northwest Forest Plan to protect all of our old-growth mature forests from being logged. Well, the reality is that the agencies are constantly putting out rhetoric that is seeking to justify their logging practices on federal land. And this is an example of a stand that is in a current timber sale that is threatened. And those are some listed here from the agency, the Bureau of Land Management's agency documents of what they are intending to do into a stand like this. So they want to manage this stand so that they can improve the habitat for northern spotted owl and nesting. Yes, this photo is from the 42 Divide timber sale, which is west of Roseburg. Cool. So forests are very important to this region, and what are we going to do about it? And they're greatly under threat. And so, what do we do about this? That's what we're going to talk to you about today. We, all of our organizations and the communities that we work with, and among others, throughout the Pacific Northwest, work to do what's called field surveying. And I have my lovely friends here who are going to tell you all about it. And with that, just going to pass it to Janice. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Janice Reed with Umpqua Watersheds. I'm president and chair of the Conservation Committee. And this is Casey Hovick, executive director.
Umpqua Watersheds has been around since 1995. We are in Douglas County, which is about 80% the size of the state of Connecticut. 52% of the land is public land. So the work we're doing to protect, restore, and celebrate the land is really important. But we couldn't do it without our partners. So really proud of our collaboration with the Pacific Northwest Forest Climate Alliance, including our friends Cascadia Wildland and Oregon Wild. They help us so much out in Douglas County to do ground truthing and to get the word out. So that's really important.
Move this down a little bit. So I just want to give you a little background on what we do when we're out there monitoring the public land and looking at what projects are out there. The first thing we really do is take a look at what type of project it is. Is it a hazard tree or danger tree removal? Is it a timber sale? Is it a clear cut or a thinning? And then these right-of-way easements are also projects. Most of those are not even in the project planning process, so you really have to keep an eye on those. So we do a little homework before we head to the field, just gathering as much information as we can about the project, the type of project, where is it, making sure we have maps too, you don't want to get lost out there. What entity is actually proposing the project, because if it is a Forest Service or a BLM, there's different regulations that apply to these projects. And then when is it happening? How much time do you have to actually go out and take a look at it and assess it? The age of the stand could come into play. You know, what treatments are they applying to these to the stands out there? The history of the area, the previous harvest history, is it a retreatment? And the surrounding property is important. Whose ownership is surrounding the private land? Take note of riparian areas or other wildlife and special status species that are out there in the landscape. So you just kind of have to know a little background about where you're going. Okay. And in cases you can engage the agency, either looking at their online information or having informal conversations with them or formal, and communicate with them, you know, ask about the project, acquire the documentation. If it's not online, you can request that too, and then provide feedback to them of what you find when you do go out in the field and you have some concerns. So in our field outings, we'll assess, you know, the validity of what they call the purpose and need. You know, does it really make sense, the purpose of why they're doing it and the need. So you want to be sure if you're taking pictures that whatever you're using, your camera or your phone, you're capturing that location data. Document your concerns, whether it's a riparian or wetland. If wildlife are in the area, make sure you document that. What you see as sign or what you hear as well, because oftentimes you can't record what you hear, so you might want to keep notes. Take note of any improper or no marking for project areas. Maybe there's some missed project area boundaries that you notice. Look at road construction and whether there's compliance on the road, things that that may not seem like they're really making sense. You know, really have your awareness up of whether this all makes sense. And then you can express your concern about these projects to the agency. So this is one of the areas that we visited. This was a right-of-way in the Archie Creek area, and we knew that the right-of-way had a certain distance from the road that they were treating. This was actually the first place we stopped, and we found that there was at least 3 trees that were beyond even the guidelines for this right-of-way. So we made note of that. We made note of the riparian areas and wetlands, expressed concern about that with the agency, how they were treating our wetlands. And then looking at whether the result was lining up with the prescription. You know, are the hazardous trees being removed for economics, or are they doing it, as they said, for their purpose and need to protect the public using the road and their employees? So, you know, we have an area here where a lot of the big trees were removed along the road, but some of the smaller, less economic ones were actually left. So you have to ask the question, you know, did they remove those trees really for safety reasons? And then all the contractors that are going out to bid on these sales, you know, sometimes they're not abiding by the rules or the regulations, and so are they staying within the, I can't read it, the established roads. So we had some of them that were opening roads that weren't even on the plan. So we took pictures of that, made sure that we were communicating that with the agency. They were running 4-wheelers up through the forest where they shouldn't have been. And were they following the guidelines for tail holds? This lower left photo is it was actually burned in the fire, but it was still alive, and the private landowner next to it used it as a tail hold without protecting it. And that's against the recommendations from the agency. The lower right photo is a culvert, or should have been. It's actually was a road construction where they did not put in a culvert. So we made note of that. So is there potential for abuse? And yes, there is. We found that private landowners next to the public land were actually taking trees that were on public property. You can see the property line. Looking straight up, you can see trees were cut on the public side of the property line. I actually brought this up to the agency too, and I heard that they were having some of their employees walk all of these lines after this. So here's just an example of one of the more devastating right-of-ways in the Archie Creek fire, where the private entity wanted to do a project. It was a right-of-way on public land to protect their own access and their employees. And so there's not a lot that the public agency could do about it, but they give recommendations. And so we did some pre-field trips to look at what the area was at the time. We took pictures, and some of the flagging for the right-of-way was so far down the hill that couldn't even see it without really trying. So I circled it, same picture on the right. It's way, way down the hill. Barely see it, and this is downhill, and it's really steep. And this is the after effect. So you can see how it was way beyond what would be considered removing trees for hazardous reasons. And so I'll let Casey talk about his section.
So Umpqua Watersheds utilizes 3 drones to capture video and data. Drones are drones for commercial use, and nonprofit are required by the FAA to have a license, and the pilot needs to be certified. And it's really important part of telling the story of being able to fly the area that the agency is doing whatever action, so that then you can go back and show what it looks like after the action. So here's an example of a right-of-way project that we're working on. It's the Big Tom right-of-way, and the drone is going to go out. We utilize software called Drone Deploy. It's a software and data company that utilizes drone to capture pictures and data to be used for analysis and reporting. The program can create 3D maps of an area and correlate data points from your ground pictures, so that you can actually, I call it naming the trees. You can go fly over an old growth tree and show what it looked like. You can then correlate what it looks like on the ground, and if they take it out, then you're able to show the big gap in there and talk about that. We've got a video I want to show you of how this will go out and do a 3D mapping real quick before you do that. This will go out, it'll take about an hour to do this particular 100 acres, but then after you do it, it'll go up and seam the pictures together so you can do a 2D or 3D map of the area. Mm-hmm. This is just an example. This isn't related to the Big Tom, but this is an example of what you can do. And it's all about telling the story, getting people to understand this is a big project that they're doing, and what effect it has on the ground, and getting people to have a connection with what they're doing, because those trees are important, and there aren't enough organizations out there looking out for the trees. So we do aerial surveys to help identify the trees in the landscape. Capturing pictures from above enables trees to be identified in rugged landscapes. A lot of times you can't even get there, and after action pictures help tell the story of what is lost. Drone work can help tell the story in detail, especially when correlated with ground surveys. Drones are a powerful tool which enables organizations to gather information efficiently and economically. In our area, a lot of the agencies don't use drones yet. There are maybe 1 or 2 of the industry groups that uses it. So it's a way for us to level the playing field. We're a small organization. We don't have a lot of resources, but because we're able to capture this data and get it out there, it puts the agencies and the industry on alert that we're watching. We know what's going on. We can show the pictures, we can show the data, we can tell the story, and we're out there. And that's one of the things that we like to give them, the image that we're everywhere. You know, when we send a ground truthing team out, and that's what we always tell them, our team, we were talking to BLM, our team was out. Well, our team a lot of times is Janice and me and 2 dogs out there surveying, but we want people in the agencies to know that we are out there and we're everywhere. And we can because of our partners at Cascadia Wildlands and KS Wild, and we're working together and drawing attention to that. So it's very important. Now I want to introduce Karen for the Blue Mountains Biodiversity Project.
I'm Karen Coulter. I'm the director of Blue Mountains Biodiversity Project. And field surveying is the backbone of our work. This is Lena in the Morgan Nesbitt sale. We have a volunteer program all summer to gather evidence of existing conditions through survey sheets and photographs. First of all, we have been monitoring and field surveying forests in the Blue Mountains since 1991, and that includes the Umatilla, the Malheur, the Ochiko, the Deschutes, and more recently the Fremont Wainema and the Wallowa-Whitman National Forests, and all on indigenous lands. And then the information from our field surveying shows evidence of existing conditions through survey sheets and photographs. So the information that we cover in the survey sheets are things like the impacts of prior logging and livestock grazing, plant community types, forest structure, wildlife sign, and soil types. The survey sheets and photographs are used to inform our comments, our objections, our objection negotiation, and potential litigation. Alora, oh no, actually this is Ella. Ella, shown here, is our part-time volunteer coordinator, and our volunteer program trains activists in the field and through orientation talks about how we use the legal system in particular. Volunteers like Alora here learn how to measure tree size correctly, slope, and canopy closure, and they also learn how to identify wildlife sign and plant species, and volunteers are also shown how to do an old growth count and how to describe habitat conditions. That was in the Morgan Nesbitt sale. These are all active sale areas in the photographs. Our summer volunteer program builds community in the forest. We camp, eat, and survey together for weeks or months, so it's a longer term immersion in the forest. We also support other groups in sales that are in our area of surveying on one of those national forests. And we help them through field surveying, comments, objections, and potential litigation coordination. One of the significant new forest trends currently is enormous landscape scale sales that range anywhere from 28,000 acres of commercial logging with one sale to about 80,000 acres of commercial logging. This is Cooper standing on the edge of never logged forest in the Morgan Nesbitt sale. We don't currently have an estimate from the Forest Service's how big the sale will be, but it looks like at least about 80,000 acres of commercial logging. And so far it hasn't been specified. The Morgan Nesbitt sale also has one of the highest acreages I've ever seen in 31 years of field surveying of never logged forests planned for logging. And that's on the Wallowa-Whitman. Another Forest Service trend is to return to areas already recently logged within the last 30 years or even less sometimes. So that's not enough time for any of the trees that were young to become mature or for any of the mature trees to become large and old. So it's a completely unsustainable rotation economically and ecologically. And this is moss in the North Fork Crooked River sale on the Ochiko National Forest, where almost the entire forest, as you can see in the background, is just small trees, and moss is standing in front of an enormous old-growth western larch log. So there's been an awful lot of large tree logging across the Blue Mountains. Andrea here is illustrating the large trees are more likely to survive fire. Drea is sitting inside a large fire scar in a live old-growth ponderosa pine, and large trees in general are more resistant to fire, even though the Forest Service is now planning another trend of returning to logging large trees and inevitably old-growth trees. For instance, the 21-inch limit in Eastern Oregon was set based on statistically a ponderosa pine is 150 years or older at 21 inches, and now they're violating that barrier for logging. Large trees are essential for wildlife habitat for many species, including pileated woodpecker, northern goshawk, Pacific fisher, American martin, and others, and great gray owl. And also, large trees also sequester more carbon and store more carbon to reduce the catastrophic effects of climate change than any other size. Yet the Forest Services decide to go after the big trees because they've logged so many large and old trees that it's mostly small now. Another Forest Service trend is to cut to very low basal areas, and they just target wherever trees are dense, no matter what lives there. In this case, you can see an elk in the background behind the hiding cover. Many species need hiding cover that they are now eliminating, as well as to protect them from predators, and thermal cover to protect them from severe winter storms or heat waves and droughts. And so other species that need denser forests that are being affected by this include deer, northern pygmy owls, northern goshawks, and a range of others. So they're focusing on high-intensity logging that ends up looking pretty much like virtual clear cuts now, and they're trying to pan it off as just commercial thinning. Also, if you log too heavily, you're disrupting the mycorrhizal fungi communities that help support forest health through nutrient and carbon transfer. This is the Baker City watershed, a high elevation view. Another very destructive Forest Service trend on the Wallowa-Whitman and the Umatilla National Forest right now is to log pristine, never logged, inventoried roadless areas overlapping municipal watersheds. Municipal watersheds have long been protected from logging, including this one, to protect water quality, but now they're using the risk, so-called, of a natural disturbance, fire, to excuse logging in these never logged watersheds. And inevitably, to log on these steep slopes, they will be logging large trees probably. So we're very concerned because such high elevation moist mixed conifer forests that you typically find in the inventoried roadless areas and the municipal watersheds retains more moisture than drier forest. And if you log it, you're likely to dry out the system, create a lot of slash, increase wind speeds through the stands by removing mature trees, and increasing fire risk rather than decreasing it as they say they're going to do. And in this case, the Baker City watershed, they're also planning to do prescribed burning as well as logging within the watershed. But prescribed burning is not a natural way this would burn. Ordinarily, the very moist, high elevation mixed conifer burns on a stand replacement level about once every 100 to 200 years. So prescribed fire does not mimic that. This is Gumboot Creek in the Morgan Nesbitt sale. As with the Baker City watershed sale, there's very steep slopes over the creeks, and it's very well documented by the science that logging and roading near creeks is detrimental to water quality and fish habitat. In the case of the Baker City watershed, species of fish that are threatened by the logging right over the creeks include sensitive red band trout, threatened bull trout, and salmon, Chinook salmon recovery. And Morgan Nesbitt, a similar situation here. Mid-Columbia steelhead are in this creek, and there's very vertical steep slope logging planned right above this creek. So we're very concerned about another devastating trend by the Forest Service in the Wallowa-Whitman National Forest in particular, to now, and the Malheur National Forest started this trend, to now go into the riparian buffers that are supposed to protect the creeks, and that would be counter to achieving riparian management objectives under the East Side screens. So we're facing a lot of challenges as the Forest Service and the timber industry work together in returning to old destructive logging practices. We need your support to help stop the rampant destruction of forest ecosystems on indigenous peoples' lands. And this is in the context of extreme climate change and the sixth mass extinction. So it's very critical to the life support systems of the earth for all of us. to be as vigorous as we can in forest defense. And that, by the way, I'm entering a big fire scar on an old growth western larch that survived. So we all depend on the natural cycles of life and on an intact atmosphere, and we hope that you will join us. And we have Blue Mountains Biodiversity Project and the other groups have tables where you can come to talk about volunteering with us or donating to us. Thank you.
My name is Katie Bilodeau. I am the staff attorney with Friends of the Clearwater. We're based out of north central Idaho, and I don't have a laser and I can't jump that high, but like right under the M, if you go west from the Rocky Mountains, that's kind of the area we watchdog. It's the traditional homeland of the Nez Perce tribe. And monitoring can tell us stories, and I'm going to tell you two stories today. One is a story over time, and one is a story over place. And the state of Idaho has its own roadless rule, and so I'd like to start with a story over time with the West Fork Crooked River inventoried roadless area. All you need to know about this map is everything that is in color is a roadless area. The state of Idaho has the second most roadless acreage outside of, or in the lower 48, it's the second. It's the first most in the lower 48, the second only to Alaska. It's about 9 million acres. So if you take a look, this is the West Fork Crooked River inventoried roadless area, and it's had fire before. As you can see, fire burns in kind of a mosaic across the landscape. And our story starts in 2016 when the Forest Service proposed logging about 200 acres in this inventoried roadless area. And the Forest Service represented to the public that there would be a minimal impact to roadless characteristics. It wouldn't be a significant impact. Of course, my organization strongly disagreed with that because we know what logging looks like after it's done. We ended up filing suit and we went to court and had to file a preliminary injunction because the logging was about to happen. And we lost the preliminary injunction. The judge, skeptical, deferred to the Forest Service. And because it was going to be such a quick logging, such a quick project in terms of getting the roadless logged, what we did is we dropped the lawsuit so we could avoid a decision on the merits, and then we started monitoring. So this is 2017. My colleague who's walking the temporary road ahead of me is about 6 feet tall. So you can see the road that was plowed into the roadless area. This is 2018. The logging was mostly done, the logging was done in this picture. And so what's interesting is in 2018, in a different logging project, in a different roadless area, the Forest Service again proposed to go into an entirely different roadless area. And what we did is we took this picture and we compared it against the roadless characteristics that are in the rule. This high quality of undisturbed soil, water, and air, this reference landscape, a natural appearing landscape. And kind of by the end of this project, by the time the second project got approved, all of the roadless logging in the second project had been dropped. All of those units had been dropped. But we could have stopped with the eco-born here, but we continued and started visiting every year. This is 2019. This was the result of some prescribed burning, and we're not entirely sure if it was overzealous or it just got out of control. So this is how it looked in 2019. This is 2020. So we're back in 2021, and what you'll notice is an entirely changed community down to the weeds. There are a few noxious weeds that came back in the area. It took a few years to decommission the road. And although we talk about being on the ground in these areas, I don't want to skip the value of having satellite pictures of these areas. I can't recommend Google time-lapse enough. If you go to Google time-lapse, you can go to the National Forest and get a pictures, satellite imagery from 1984 to about 2 years behind the current year. So you can see this landscape change over time and over space. So a fire came through the West Fork Crooked River roadless area in 2022. And just for comparison, the volunteers that went out to monitor took a picture. This is how the post-fire landscape looks outside of the area that was logged in the same general area. And this is the area that you saw logged in the 2018 picture. And I would submit a lot of these roadless characteristics, at least for the area that was logged, was gone. And I think if these kind of pictures were in the administrative record, and this is something that a judge would have looked at, that same judge that was skeptical the first time that we were before him, this would have pushed him towards our side. So the second story I want to tell you is a story over space. And this story is about the Dead Laundry project in the Clearwater National Forest. It's about a 4,000 acre logging project. While the Dead Laundry boundaries itself isn't roadless, it is surrounded by roadless country in the Clearwater National Forest. It is a delightful definition of remote. And logging in this area hasn't happened for decades. So it really is kind of connective habitat between these two roadless areas. We took the Forest Service's road system on GIS. We had it as a result of a Freedom of Information Act request. They're easy to get if you ask for the GIS files. And then you can map it, and we mapped it and went out with cameras that geotag. And most cell phones geotag now. So this is something you can pull off the cell phone and then map over top of their roads. So we were concerned because the Dead Laundry project proposed about 150 miles of road work in this really remote part of the Clearwater National Forest. And what you see here, it's hard to see in this picture, but there's standing water in that lower right corner of it. And this is on what the Forest Service had mapped as a road and wanted to reconstruct. We took these pictures in September, and there is thriving vegetation in these wet areas, so this is essentially a wetland. This is another picture mapped. It's close to the pictures that come off the road. I'm sorry, yeah. It's close to about the picture 4236. So this is supposed to be road reconstruction, and we looked for this road and started to follow the road template. And as you can see, a lot of fairly large trees would have to be removed. I know the Forest Service plays pretty fast and loose with reconstruction, and when a court sees the term reconstruction, you don't think it's very substantial. But I think these pictures kind of dispel that impression. And I think that's it. I mean, I think telling these stories and getting these pictures, at least into the administrative record, they help attorneys, because attorneys can then actually put this kind of story into the briefs, and these pictures are much easier for a judge to relate to. And so in addition to helping kind of push a judge over to our side, this type of monitoring can help in downstream litigation with standing, and this is where I'm going to turn it over to Kelsey.
Thank you. So hi, my name is Kelsey Furman, and I'm an attorney and conservation fellow with KS Wild. KS Wild is a conservation nonprofit located in Ashland, Oregon, and we advocate for the forests, wildlife, and waters of the Rogue and Klamath basins, and work to restore the biological diversity of the Klamath-Siskiyou region of Southwest Oregon and Northwest California, as shown up there. We use environmental law, science, education, and collaboration to help build healthy ecosystems and sustainable communities. KS Wild routinely participates in commenting, monitoring, and litigation affecting 8 million acres of public lands managed by the Medford District BLM and the Forest Service Regions 5 and 6, including the Rogue River, Siskiyou, Fremont, Wainiema, can always do that one, Shasta Trinity, Six Rivers, and Klamath National Forests. I've been with KS Wild for the last 1.5 years, and this has been just a really great part of my job, getting out into the forests and getting a really up-close into the projects and learning about them. So a couple reasons why we field check. As previously mentioned, field checking is an important part of conservation work because it provides information for our site-specific comments, subsequent appeals, objections, and standing declarations. Field checking gives us a more accurate picture of what the agency is proposing and what potential ecological impacts will be. Seeing the landscape and the timber mark also helps us gauge which projects require our small staff's limited time and resources. So the photo to the right was taken during a field check in April 2019, where we got to a unit before specific trees were marked for treatment or for retention or take. It highlights the late successional old growth forest character present in the poor windy unit that was authorized for logging. The photo in the middle is from a field check in April 2022 in the same unit that had been marked for timber sale. This photo shows trees that had initially been marked for retention, but that the BLM later unmarked with black paint in order to increase the timber volume from the logged unit. And I tried to highlight those in the picture. Field checking is also necessary in order for our organization to establish standing. To bring a successful lawsuit, there's an important initial hurdle. Plaintiffs must show that a project will cause an injury that is actual or imminent and concrete and particularized. So simply put, we need to show that we have something at stake. So when we venture into the field and spend time on our public lands within the boundaries of these timber sales, year after year, we're able to show the Interior Board of Land Appeals or courts that we have standing. Also, we include a lot of pictures in our standing declarations. This is often the only time a judge or a clerk will see pictures of the places that they are deciding the fate of, kind of building off what Katie was saying. And then there's me establishing my presence in a unit. So the Oregon and California railroad revested lands, known as ONC lands, lie in this checkerboard pattern shown in the orange in the photo, through numerous counties of Western Oregon, containing more than 2.4 million acres, most of which are administered by the BLM. The Oregon and California Revested Lands Sustained Yield Management Act of 1937, ONC Act for short, classified these ONC lands as timberlands to be managed for permanent forest production in conformity with the principle of sustained yield. The ONC Act also provided for protecting watersheds, regulating stream flow, contributing to the economic stability of local communities, and providing recreational facilities. So as you can see from the map, the checkerboard pattern is the physical reality for us in Southern Oregon and along the I-5 corridor. So the ONC Act and BLM's interpretation of a timber-dominant act, interpretation of it as a timber-dominant act significantly affects the lands we monitor and projects that we deal with. This checkerboard-style ownership also means that there are blocks of habitat, watersheds, plantation establishments separated between blocks of private land, which are used and regulated in distinct ways. Unfortunately, that's not how nature works and makes it tough on fish, wildlife, recreation, access, and fire management, all of which are extremely limited by the checkerboard nature of these ONC lands. I just wanted to briefly bring this up because it's so influential in what we deal with in the field, but there's a lot more history and current legal issues moving through the courts that I recommend looking into if you want to learn more about it. So what we're seeing in the field, first, we always make it a priority to walk proposed new and temporary roads. Often what we'll see are large trees properly marked for retention, but they'll be in the middle of the proposed roadway. So this means that those large diameter trees won't actually remain post-logging, regardless of the initially appropriate mark. Here are some photos of large trees marked for retention that are within the boundaries of proposed roads. The right two photos were taken in March of 2022 within the proposed Late Mungers timber sale near Williams, Oregon. And the two photos that were taken on the left were taken in April 2022, showing the location of a proposed logging road through an old growth forest in a poor windy unit just north of Grants Pass. The good news is that we, along with our allies, successfully challenged the poor windy BIOP in federal court, biological opinion, and this halted the poor windy timber sales. So for now, those big trees are safe. Second, we are seeing the effects of decades of fire exclusion from fire-dependent ecosystems. We're seeing large number of small diameter conifers, mostly white firs, and we're not seeing enough prescribed burning. We're hearing a lot about wildfire prevention from the BLM as their justification for timber sales targeting old growth in late successional reserves. But in order to get to those old growth timber sales, we have to drive through dense second growth plantations on both private and BLM lands. So we have BLM failing to address those plantations and the wildfire risk they pose to communities. Instead, they're focusing on converting old growth forests in the reserves to open sterile forests in the name of wildfire prevention. And finally, we're seeing proposed, well, more than this, but for this presentation, finally, we're seeing proposed group selection, AKA mini clear cuts, followed by regeneration logging near our rural communities and slash piles left over from previous timber sales. Both regeneration logging and slash piles create significant wildfire hazards that the BLM admit in their own analysis documents. The picture on the top right shows big trees marked for group selection, and that means that all of those trees would come out. They're all marked. And then in the picture in the bottom right shows an old slash pile from a previous timber sale in the middle of a new unit. But some more good news is that we, along with our allies, filed a lawsuit challenging the Lost Antelope timber sale, which are what the two pictures are from, and the BLM ended up dropping it. So yeah, it's exciting to see that getting out in the field works. We continue to monitor these projects through field checking and use that knowledge to better inform our response. And with that, I'll hand it back off to Madeline. We're done? We're done.
Does anybody have any questions? And I guess before that, I missed the ending of my story with the second one that I realized after I had sat down. No, it's fine. I mean, we actually turned in that monitoring. We wrote up a report, which a QR code you can find on our table. We wrote up a report and turned it into the Forest Service, and then the Forest Service withdrew the entire project to put out at a later date. So, the monitoring can impact anything from one logging unit to an entire project, and I totally forgot to say that. So with that, does anybody have any other questions? All right.
I have a question for Karen about your summer program. Is that 100% volunteer? And so do you ever hook people who want to volunteer up with sponsorship, or is that just left up to the individual?
The way it's structured is that people can come for any period of time, but we strongly advise and recommend that you come out for at least 1 week, because otherwise people who come for a less period are less likely to come back and less likely to learn a lot. And then we advise, if you can, at least 2 weeks. And so we are in a remote area with very little support for forest defense. So most people come from outside the area. We have volunteers from all different states, even from a couple other countries. And we train people with anything they need to know. And we have volunteers from age 12 to 70 or so that have come out. But when it's a minor, they have to come out with a relative who takes responsibility for them. And the biggest source of our volunteers is word of mouth from very satisfied volunteers who had a good time. I'm not sure what else your question was exactly.
No, I was thinking it was like a summer-long.
Yeah, From the beginning of June almost to the end of September. We stop before the rifle season starts. Yeah. Right. And then people just bring their own camping gear, contribute to food, mostly self-sufficient, and we found that that works pretty well. And you just have to call me to hook up with us, and it's a process where I may not know where we're going first, and then later I'll let you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, because things keep changing. Yep.
Yeah.
This training and this program is on public lands, not on private lands, correct?
Mine? Or all of ours?
Anybody?
Yeah.
Public lands because of the trespassing issue. Is there any, is there anything for private lands in monitoring?
I don't have it, but
As it is.
There are other groups that may monitor that, but we don't deal with state, our organization doesn't deal with state lands or private lands. Yeah, it's all federal.
Yeah, it's a little tougher thing. You have to do other kinds of monitoring, maybe drones and flyovers and mapping and things of that nature. A little tougher. I like the fact that you're able to get on there and take photos and whatnot, and without the risk of trespassing, although that's not a complete thing.
Well, that's one of the critical things that we're dealing with, even on public land, because they're putting so many gates up that makes it very, very difficult for all of us to get out and do the work that we do. You would have to do it by walking through the, around the gates, which sometimes is very difficult. And that's one of the things that drones allow us to do is, okay, you're going to put up a gate, but we're still seeing what you're doing on our land. And we can also see what they're doing on private land, and then compare and contrast, real time and over time to see the differences.
Yeah, mountain bikes are also a good device to use.
Can I just add something? I was going to say there's also just significantly less regulations on private lands than there are on public lands. And so there's just less tools that we have to hold the private industry accountable.
Right.
So if you're doing drone work on private lands with the new private forest accord, have you been able to document anything specific?
We've just started doing our drone work, but that is one of the things that we want to be able to do, is to be able to, how are we doing? How are they doing according to the plan, and make sure that they are protecting the riparian areas the way they're supposed to.
I think it was Kelsey. I think you talked about the gathering the photos and how your new photos would have influenced the judge from a previous case, but you didn't have them at the time to influence the judge. So my question is, it seems we have 10 or 20 years of history of photos of logging projects. Couldn't you have used some historical stuff in your original case?
Yeah, that's entirely possible. I think the thing that made it a little trickier in this case is what actually happened it was a shelter wood cut, right? And so we actually grabbed photos of what shelter wood cuts looked like and introduced it into the court. I think we introduced it through declarations, and then the Forest Service came in and gave like a very euphemistic picture of a shelter wood cut, because they're the technical experts. The court deferred to them, but now you have this place-based connection where it's like, all right, they said, here's the map, Judge, where they said they were going to shelter wood log, and this is what that looked like afterwards. And they can't come in with like, this is what shelter wood logging looks like, because like that's exactly what they did on this. So.
This is a question for any of you. It sounds like in your surveying and documenting work, you build up quite a library of media through photography, drone use, satellite imagery, some of which I would imagine might be quite striking or potentially moving when viewed by members of the public. And I'm wondering if any of you have ever experimented in taking that media and developing public products that might be more like qualitative or creative oriented, like film or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So all of us are involved in what's, I think Casey mentioned it, we're part of the Pacific Northwest Forest Alliance, and many organizations who are present at the conference here are also part of that alliance. But basically, in one of our working groups, that we're all a part of, is focused on field surveying, and that's like exactly what our project is right now. So we're working collaboratively to gather up all of the examples of bad logging projects that we're seeing on the ground, and developing a more accessible way for the public and for policymakers to just see what we're seeing through that media use. But there's definitely a lot more opportunity, and that's like exactly what our intention is right now. So thanks for bringing that up.
Say something like
Yeah.
Yeah, we've also used independent videographers to do short films of what we're doing on particular sales, like before and after in the case of the EXF sale, things like that.
Thank you.
And also there was a timber sale that our organization was following called the Flat Country Timber Sale in the Willamette National Forest, and we actually do have a short video on that folks should definitely check out. Luckily that one was dropped. For now. I think,
and I just, ironically, we just got the scoping notice for Morgan Nesbitt's Bay, which is something I will just put a plug. That project is very, very scary, and I hope people will pay attention to it. A question I just have for you is, especially one of the things we've been doing out in Eastern Oregon is starting to do a little bit more of looking at projects after the fact. And I feel like whether you're looking at things beforehand or afterwards, when you know it's just bearing witness to this horrible thing or what's about to happen, how do you take care of your mental health? I mean, seriously.
Well, this collaboration that we are again involved in, the Pacific Northwest Forest Climate Alliance, is so important to all of us because we're seeing things across the whole Pacific Northwest. We're talking about things. We're on so many different committees that is engaging public policy. We're documenting things, and we're always, how do we collaborate and bring this out so that the public is aware of what's going on? The fact that we have this collaboration then is really helpful to us, so we don't feel so alone and what can we possibly do and why bother? No, we're making a big difference, and that really helps us a lot.
Yeah, and when it's convenient, mostly, and sometimes when it's not convenient, we document how a sale went down that we couldn't stop. For instance, Paula has gone out to the big mosquito sale, which we were intervening in, and recorded that actually they did log old-growth ponderosa pines when they said that was what they were trying to protect. And then Paula also directed us when we were near another sale called South George to see how that was logged. And it was not supposed to be clear cut except for a couple sale units, and it all looked like clear cuts. And then I also saw the Upper Pataha sale, which was a categorical exclusion, which did these huge barren clear cut roadside so-called fire defensive zones or defensive fuel zones or whatever, and have documentation of that. So we try to do both as much as we can, but our main emphasis is trying to stop the damage before it starts. And then with your mental health question, I get really depressed about the state of the earth and climate change, but it's not very helpful to stay in a depressive state of despair all the time. So I try to take real vacations. I just came back from Thailand for 2 weeks, so out of the country. That was very helpful with my son. I also find that I'm much happier being in the forest. When I'm doing the field season work, I'm pretty happy even though I'm concerned about the sales and even though I'm thinking about legal arguments. And then when I have work to engage in to defend the forest, that makes me feel better. I think one of the antidotes to despair is to work actively against climate change and forest destruction.
I think one of the things that I do, and that even though we go out and look at these places that are very sad after the fact, we always take a buddy. It's better to go out monitoring with a buddy. It's pretty lonely by yourself, so that's always good. And then also this frame of mind. There was a little while that was being really bummed that a lot of this stuff was happening. And one of our board members said to me, like, you have to look at, like, it's this impact you're not seeing. He's just like, if somebody weren't there watching, it would be so much worse. And you see that in Idaho, you see which national forests don't have like a little watchdog group like ours. And they're the national forests that like just have a lot more logging, a lot more clear cuts, like a lot more like timber production. So it's kind of a little bit of farmland too. Maybe back in the corner.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much for all your work. My question is just about media engagement and how successful you've been in getting reporters to either review the documentation that you are collecting or go out with you on these field checks or anything like that to help tell the story of what's going on.
Yeah, years ago, in the beginning of our project, when it was just Asante and me, we invited an Oregonian reporter to come out with us, and she came out with us all day. The Forest Service locked the gate to a bunch of clear cuts in advance of our coming, even though I'd cleared this with her already, and she fumbled around and said, oh, I just don't have the key. And the reporter's day-long trip with us got edited down to one short paragraph that had some things wrong. So that happens a lot. Even when you're trying to stay really clearly on your message and not start rambling off in different directions they could take other ways. And then now the media coverage is, in newspapers anyway, seems to be a lot less because of the corporate monopolization.
Okay. I've been alarmed at the rate at which the public is being blocked out of public lands. I know many of these roads have reciprocal right-of-way agreements, and so I believe that in many of those cases, the public money has gone to building and maintaining those roads. Do you know if there's been anybody that's challenged the timber industry's right to lock these gates and lock the public out of the public lands?
There's a panel on Sunday about that. There are two groups that are going to speak about that. They don't.
Questions? Yeah. So do you know if with the LiDAR you can identify specific insured overload? I mean specific ones, not just generally.
In my experience, thankfully we have a volunteer who compiles LiDAR maps of all of the sales that we're going to, and it's really helpful, and it's mostly been very, very accurate. So it is a really great tool that we've used. I mean, it's very much like a green dot is like where it says is where the taller trees are, and then you're there and there's a tall big tree. So it is actually pretty accurate.
So the characteristics are elevation and canopy?
It does account for elevation and like from ravines and things like that, but yeah, so it accounts for that, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. It is pretty accurate. And I'd be happy to help you.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't really have a question, but I just want to put a plug in for these guys, because I've been out with Karen before, and it's remarkable to be, number one, be in the woods, and to be traipsing just through with a compass and just, it's wonderful, and it does so much good, and you learn so much about the plants and the wildlife science stuff. It's great. It's worth doing every minute.
Little forest baby.
And I would just add on to that note, in previous years we've had a similar panel to this, and we've usually had a representative from BARC they're based in Portland, and they do monitoring on Mountain National Forest. So if anyone in the room is based in Portland, that is a really good organization to do this monitoring work with. And I'm just going to use the platform a little bit longer because I don't think I mentioned earlier where the National Forests and the BLM lands that my organization monitors. So I just wanted to be clear about that. So we are doing the Willamette National Forest, the Umpqua National Forest. There's not much happening in the Sayusala National Forest, thankfully, but we do monitor that. And then we are also in the Medford, Roseburg, Coos Bay, and Eugene BLM districts. So that's, so if you live around there, talk to me, and we can go out and do some monitoring there. Or also just, any of us are also doing this.
Yeah, just to, you brought up media. Is there any alternative media? I know I'm from California, and I get It's Wild through this, so I read all your stuff, and it informs me and educates me about what compare and contrast to California's things. But we do, in our area, we do have some alternative media that we're able to get. Some actually journalists who go out and do in-depth stories and produce them in some. They're more localized, but there is some alternative media. You have some of the sources there that you can go to get a reporter, a journalist who will actually do an in-depth story and get that out. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things that we're really working on. We have a radio station. It's also on the air on the internet, kqua.org. You can listen to it anytime. It's about to go full power, but we have podcasts. One of them is Living Downstream, Conservation Today, Earth in Tune, and we're developing them, but we're also engaging other media sources across the Pacific Northwest to put their shows on, and even Canada. We're working with them on a Green Teacher episode and trying to connect the dots like we're doing here. Our guest speaker at our banquet this year is a renowned Oregon author, Marcy Cottrell Houle. So she's written several books, and we're hopeful that she will entertain the possibility of maybe doing a book about what we're doing here. But she has the connections. She also has close connections with the Oregon Field Guide and getting them out and looking at what we're all doing. So just keep working those connections, I think, is what's really important.
Well, the question came up about access to public lands and gates. Certainly it's important for people to get out on our land and be able to enjoy it, see what's out there, and actually make sure that it's being protected. But I want to point out that that's a double-edged sword because there's so much habitat destruction and degradation involved in roads. Not only watersheds, but disturbance of wildlife habitat. Where I live in Montana, grizzly bears and roads do not coexist very well, and human access. Species like elk also prefer areas where it's secure from a lot of human intrusion. I know that groups do survey wood closures is part of the work too. I wonder if any of you have done like gate effectiveness, enclosure effectiveness monitoring to make sure that the security is being maintained.
Well, we're
Go ahead.
We're actually starting that. One of our grants this last year was going out on the landscape, and volunteer that went out. I think of the 8 or 9 gates they just randomly plucked on closed roads were either broken, non-existent, or folks drove around them, or weren't actually lost. And so we're kind of hoping to launch more of a crowdsourced monitoring this summer. I think because of the Forest Service, they don't have enough law enforcement to get to the 2 million acres of front country that we monitor and the 4 million acres of like wilderness area that exists. And so we're hoping that if we can kind of set up like a GIS program, then anybody on the forest that sees a road that has like a supposed to be closed road that's unlocked can geotag that photo, give it to us, and we can map it. We know that the Forest Service doesn't have this information. So.
And I just want to speak to the drone part. Absolutely, there should be concerns about the use of drones, and that's why you have to have a license to do it. We fly at 400 feet. We're not close to the ground, and we're over the canopy in trying to tell the story. But absolutely, it should be regulated, and we all need to be aware of any impact that technology, especially drones, have on the landscape and wildlife.
And just to build on your point, you know, it's a really common problem to have just this excessively bloated road network on national forest land. And so like the Malheur, for example, has over 9,000 miles worth of road on it. And depending on sort of of existing road, and that doesn't count the like road templates and temporary roads that never got decommissioned and all of that stuff, which there are plenty. And so, you know, like the Malheur, depending on how you count it and what you include, has between 3.5 and 4.5 miles per square mile on average of road. Like just, you know, like really think about that for a second, and that's not uncommon. And the Malheur and the Wallowa-Whitman, I believe, are the only national forests in the country that never complied with regulations that they were supposed to have an actual travel plan in place. So that happened in 2005 where, you know, rules came down that were like, hey, you got to figure it out. They never bothered and still haven't. For example, so it's not uncommon for that kind of thing to occur, and or, you know, as far as the bloated road network goes, and the Forest Service itself, I've forgotten the statistics off the top of my head, but they admit to millions of dollars in budget shortfalls to be able to deal with the existing road network. So, you know, it is a huge issue, and it is very environmentally destructive, both for wildlife and water quality. And as far as the effectiveness of closures, I believe, I'm not 100% certain, but I think that Great Old Broadsford Wilderness and Central Oregon Land Watch did some work in the Ochoco. Matthew, I don't know if you remember any of that, but you'd have to contact them and check out their website. But I think that they did do kind of a look at some of this and found some pretty eye-popping stuff in their neighborhood.
We've been doing some road surveys in the Ochoco just to try and get a handle on what's closed and what's not. In the Ochoco, the Forest Service closes a road logistically, but they don't actually put barriers up. They just say, oh, you see this dot here, that means it's closed. So they're used a lot. So yeah, we do some monitoring on that, trying to get out there, and then we can use that in our comments to them about, hey, you're not following your own rules.
And just one other little quick note is that the excessive road network, if you think about the chronic fine sediments and erosions that is generated and how that reaches creeks, there's really nothing like that mimicking, like, you know, historically over the long term of like geologic history, there's plenty of disturbance, there's volcanoes, earthquakes, landslides, all kinds of stuff, but this chronic, you know, fine sediment and erosion across the whole landscape is really sort of unprecedented in the sense in terms of what aquatic organisms have to deal with, and so it's really detrimental to aquatic systems to have this like just ever-present source of chronic fine sediment in the system.
Just add one more story about roads as well. So after the 2020 wildfires that happened in this area, the Forest Service put out huge proposals for roadside logging in the fire-affected areas. And so they were saying that they needed to go into, I think Janice actually shared a couple of photos from it, basically go into all of these remote roads that were affected by fire and clear cut on either side of the road up to 200 or 300 feet on either side. And kind of a field surveying success story that came out of this proposal was we actually went to a lot of these roads and found that they weren't leading to anywhere. They were just like random spur roads that were already overgrown, and a lot of it was almost a year and a half after the fire, and so most of the trees that were going to fall that were affected by the fire already were falling over the road. So the roads were like effectively closing themselves from the fire, and the Forest Service wanted to go in there and clean those up to facilitate future logging projects. Like that was the only purpose of that, and to also sell the trees along the road. And so we went to all of these roads and took really good documentation to what we're all talking about, photos and everything, and they didn't have a response. They were like, well, okay, we'll drop all those. So we actually did successfully drop hundreds of miles of roads that they were planning on doing roadside logging because we told this story.
I think we're out of time.
Oh,
Thank you.